The air in the cul-de-sac was too quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of suburban life, but the brittle, pressurized silence that precedes a thunderclap, a silence Ethan Vance had come to associate solely with Penelope Albright, president of the Sweetwater Estates Homeowners Association. Ethan sat at his kitchen island, the polished granite cool beneath his forearms, staring at the latest piece of official HOA correspondence. It was a formal, laser-printed document, the kind that cost more in ink than the grievance was worth, centered on one subject, the gate. Non-compliant stain hue, he muttered, running a tired hand through his close-cropped hair. The gate was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive compliance. After 6 months of bureaucratic warfare with the Architectural Review Committee, ARC, which Penelope led with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove, Ethan had commissioned a custom, triple-reinforced cypress gate, complete with decorative iron filigree. He had submitted the plans, the materials list, the color swatch, federal brown, and the installation schedule. Everything had been approved, signed, sealed, and delivered. The gate, installed 2 weeks ago, was perfect. And now the fine, $250 a day, retroactive to installation, for the subjectively perceived deviation from the approved federal brown, which Penelope had officially reclassified as unacceptable sepia. Ethan didn't just own a house in Sweetwater Estates. He owned the quiet, detached corner lot, the one that backed up to a nature preserve and, crucially, had the longest driveway and the most generous setback. It gave him space, and in Penelope's world, space was nonconformity. His previous profession as a systems engineer, one who spent 2 decades designing security protocols for defense contractors, had given him a unique appreciation for rules, structure, and most importantly, vulnerabilities. Penelope saw the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs, as a shield. Ethan saw them as a poorly coded operating system filled with exploits waiting to be found. He stood, walking past the floor-to-ceiling windows toward his garage, the new fine crinkled in his fist. He had spent the last 7 days preparing for this exact moment. He hadn't fought the fine. He hadn't called the HOA lawyer. He hadn't even responded to the email. He had simply built the trap. The trap wasn't a physical device, not in the traditional sense. It was a digital and legal perimeter, a zero-tolerance boundary designed to weaponize Penelope's worst habit, overreach. He paused at the edge of his immaculate lawn, examining the boundary. The legal property line was subtly marked by a line of low, approved stone pavers, an aesthetically pleasing way to denote private property. The cypress gate itself sat a comfortable foot inside that line, meaning the small strip of grass and pavers leading up to it was unambiguously Ethan's jurisdiction. He walked into the garage, which was less a place for cars and more a climate-controlled data center. He checked the status indicator on a sleek black box mounted high on the wall, tucked neatly behind a power inverter. The box housed a high-resolution directional camera and an ultrasonic sensor array, both powered by an independent solar charging system, all completely contained within the 4 walls of his own structure. The system was simple. It had been programmed to detect and record any non-wildlife object, human size, human gait, crossing the stone paver boundary line for a duration of more than 5 seconds, or engaging in persistent physical interaction with the private gate lock. More importantly, the system wasn't just recording. It was connected to a dedicated encrypted network link. The moment the protocol was breached, the footage would be time-stamped, geo-verified, and instantly uploaded to 3 different cloud servers, followed by an automated filing with the district court's remote submission portal for an emergency temporary restraining order, ETRO, citing repeated and documented trespassing and harassment. Ethan had spent 4 months consulting a property lawyer in the next county over, meticulously building the legal justification for the ETRO based on Penelope's decade-long history of HOA abuse. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Agnes, the only neighbor who still spoke to him, and who served as his unofficial canary in the coal mine. Agnes. She's on the move. Blue BMW, speed walking. looking like she's about to rewrite the Declaration of Independence on your sidewalk. Ethan smiled, a slow, genuine smile that hadn't touched his face in months. He returned to the front window. There she was. Penelope Albright, 55, immaculate in a tailored white pantsuit that looked far too expensive for a casual mid-afternoon intimidation session. Her silver hair was shellacked into an unmoving helmet, and her face held the familiar expression of a woman who had just smelled something unpleasant that she alone had the power to rectify. She approached the gate like a general inspecting a poorly defended fortress. She didn't stop at the curb. She didn't stop at the sidewalk. She crossed the curb, stepped onto the soft, manicured grass of Ethan's easement, and stopped just short of the low stone pavers. "Mr. Vance!" Her voice was a sharp, high-pitched instrument designed to cut through glass. She didn't shout, but her tone implied that any attempt to ignore her was a federal offense. Ethan opened the front door, stepping onto the porch. He didn't move any further. He maintained the barrier. "Mrs. Albright, to what do I owe the pleasure of this unscheduled field inspection?" "Don't be deliberately obtuse, Ethan," she snapped, pulling the latest fine notice from the pocket of her pantsuit. The unacceptable sepia decree. The stain is non-compliant. It reads sepia. We require federal brown. This is a $250 per day fine. It must be rectified by end of day, or the ARC will vote for a mandatory licensed contractor to remove and replace the structure at your expense. I submitted a swatch for federal brown. It was approved, Ethan said, his voice calm, measured, and utterly devoid of heat. The application of the approved stain to the approved wood type, using the approved method, resulted in this hue. I fulfilled every obligation. The result is the issue. Your attempts at legalistic loophole maneuvering have reached their limit, Penelope declared, waving the paper furiously. She took a step forward, placing her foot directly on the outermost stone paver. "Look at this gate. It offends the aesthetic sensibilities of the entire subdivision." "Mrs. Albright," Ethan said, his eyes flicking to the hidden sensor array in his garage. The system's internal timer started counting, T-minus 5 seconds. "You are standing on private property. The easement ends at the curb, and the pavers mark the line of my land. I have previously sent the HOA a cease and desist letter regarding unauthorized entry or interaction with my property. That letter defines interaction as any physical presence beyond the curb without explicit invitation." Penelope laughed, a brittle, dry sound like a dead leaf skittering across pavement. "Oh, please. This tiny sliver of grass? This is community right-of-way. Your cease and desist is a childish fantasy, Ethan. I am the president of the association. I have a fiduciary duty to inspect the non-compliance. T-minus 3 seconds. Ethan felt the familiar, thrilling adrenaline surge he used to get when debugging a critical system error in real time. He knew he had to keep her there, keep her arguing, keep her in the detection zone. "My deed is clear, Penelope. The boundary is the paver line. You have no right to step over it. I am giving you a final verbal warning. Step back to the sidewalk." She bristled at the use of her first name and the command in his tone. This man, this recluse, challenging her authority in public. The hubris was intoxicating. She needed to assert dominance. She needed to show him, definitively, that his precious little gate, his little fence, and his petty boundaries meant nothing to the HOA. She took a second step forward, crossing the line completely. Her feet were now firmly planted on the grass strip between the pavers and the gate. She was inside the perimeter, T-minus 1 second, 0. A high-pitched, nearly inaudible tone sounded in Ethan's ear, delivered via a discreet Bluetooth earpiece. Protocol engaged, Penelope didn't notice the noise. She was too focused on the look of controlled fury she expected to see on Ethan's face. She didn't get it. She got calm. "Now what, Ethan? Are you going to call the police? For me stepping on your 2 square feet of sepia-adjacent lawn." She jabbed her index finger, a thick silver ring flashing, toward the wooden gate. Her body leaned forward, pressing past the gate itself, into the no-tolerance zone. "No, Penelope," Ethan replied, his voice still low, still perfectly level. He pulled the remote control from his pocket, the one Agnes had seen him hold earlier. It was a custom housing for a high-end garage door opener, but the functions had been repurposed. He pressed the large, rubberized button on the remote once. In the garage, the black box emitted a silent, powerful signal. The directional camera, already recording, locked the frame. The ultrasonic sensor verified the human presence and location one last time. Then, three things happened simultaneously. Three digital acts that sealed her fate. A pre-drafted legal document, titled Emergency Petition for Restraining Order and Declaratory Judgment Regarding Property Trespass and Documented Harassment, automatically submitted to the county court with a clerk-verified timestamp. A copy of the complete, time-stamped, geo-verified 4K video recording showing her trespass and the preceding warning. Finished uploading to the evidence server cluster, an email, pre-written, formal, and devastating, fired off to every member of the HOA board, the sound of the blue BMW's tires squealing as Penelope peeled away from Ethan's curb was the only concession she gave to panic. Ethan stood on his porch until the silence returned, now feeling less pressurized and more like a void, the sudden vacuum left after a calculated explosion. He had set the fuse, and now the shrapnel was flying. He stepped back inside, the door closing behind him with a heavy, satisfying click. He didn't need to check the security system. The high-pitched tone in his earpiece had already confirmed the successful execution of Protocol PA. The Penelope Albright perimeter breach. His phone, lying on the cool kitchen island, was no longer merely buzzing. It was vibrating in frantic, rhythmic pulses. Agnes text, "Holy Mother of God. Kellington just called me. He's losing his mind. Said you filed a TRO and attached a video? Are you a goddamn vigilante?" Ethan picked up the phone and opened his encrypted correspondence with his lawyer, David Chen, not the David Chen on the HOA board, but the property rights specialist Ethan had been consulting for months. Chen, email, the court. Accepted the etro. Hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. They designated it exigent circumstances. The 8. Video evidence is unassailable. Clear verbal warning. Clear line of trespass, clear display of intent to harass. You are protected for now. Stay calm. Do not communicate with anyone associated with the HOA or the Albright family. The HOA board is in chaos. Ethan felt the tension, which had been coiled tight in his shoulders for months, finally begin to slacken, just slightly. This wasn't about the gate stain anymore. It was about control. By bypassing the HOA's internal corrupt appeal process and going straight to the judicial system with irrefutable, time-stamped evidence, Ethan had demonstrated that he didn't fear their rules. He knew how to use the system better than they did. His eyes drifted to the window. The cul-de-sac looked serene, bathed in the gold light of the late afternoon sun, but beneath the surface, the neighborhood was already fracturing. Penelope Albright slammed the door to her home office, a space typically reserved for dispensing directives, not absorbing defeat. The pristine white telephone receiver, already sticky with sweat, rested precariously on the desk. She had just finished the most humiliating, terrifying, and fruitless 20-minute phone call of her career with James Kellington, the HOA's retained counsel. "He filmed me. He lured me," she hissed, pacing the plush carpet, her expensive white pantsuit feeling suddenly stained and dirty. "He committed entrapment. He can't use a video taken illegally to— Penelope, listen to me." Kellington's voice had been granite hard over the line. The camera was inside his private garage. The paver line is, according to the deeds you yourself approved, his private property. He warned you verbally and in writing prior to this incident. You crossed the line after explicit warning to interfere with an approved structure. That's not entrapment. That's documented criminal trespass and documented civil harassment. The video is admissible. The judge accepted the etro without blinking. Kellington's next words had been the death knell. Pending the injunction hearing tomorrow, the court order explicitly suspends your authority to enforce any HOA covenants, issue fines, or initiate legal action against Mr. Vance. Furthermore, due to the filing of the harassment claim against you personally, the board has convened an emergency meeting in 40 minutes to discuss a temporary change of leadership. She was an exposed flank. She was a general who had walked directly onto a landmine, and the damage wasn't just physical. It was constitutional. The power she wielded, the ability to find, to control, to demand, was predicated entirely on her position. If she lost that, she was just Penelope Albright, a rich woman who disliked her neighbor's gate. Her mind raced, desperately searching for an angle. She couldn't fight the trespass. The evidence was too clean. She had to shift the narrative. She had to attack Ethan's character and his legal methods. The emergency board meeting was held virtually, a stark, sterile collection of faces on a widescreen TV in Penelope's office. David Chen, a quiet finance executive, spoke first, his voice surprisingly firm. Penelope, the filing states that you threatened to confiscate ARC documents and schedule a mandatory removal during the trespass. Is that accurate? Penelope leaned into the camera, trying to project absolute, unwavering authority. David, I was using hyperbole to stress the severity of his non-compliance. Ethan Vance is destabilizing this community. He's a recluse, a systems engineer. Clearly a man with too much time and resources who is obsessed with circumventing our bylaws. This entire trap, as he calls it, is nothing more than a desperate manufactured attempt to intimidate this board and evade paying his rightful fines. Shelley Davis, the property manager, cleared her throat nervously. Ma'am, with respect, the fine is for the hue of a gate. The court is taking a restraining order against the board president for harassment. The optics are catastrophic. Mr. Vance's lawyer has also forwarded the court filing to every major real estate listing agency in the area. This is going to hit the local news. Penelope's hands clenched until her knuckles were white. The news. That was the real threat. Her carefully constructed reputation as the pillar of the community would crumble. This is not an option, Penelope declared, slamming her hand on the desk, the sound crackling through the virtual meeting. I will fight this. David, Shelley, you will issue a statement immediately. It will state that Mr. Vance is a litigant with a history of non-compliance, and that the board stands with its president against these frivolous accusations. We will subpoena his equipment. We will find the illegality in his surveillance setup. Kellington, visible in a small window, finally interjected. I strongly advise against that, Penelope. Any attempt to enforce rules or retaliate while the ETRO is active would be a direct violation of a court order and could lead to contempt charges. You are effectively sidelined until tomorrow. We must appear tomorrow and argue that the harassment is not imminent and that your position requires you to interact with his property, despite the video evidence. The board voted 3-1, Penelope being the dissenting vote, to temporarily suspend her enforcement authority and assign it to David Chen, citing ongoing litigation risk. The line of authority was severed. The shield was gone. Ethan woke up the next morning not to the sound of Penelope's BMW, but to the gentle ping of his doorbell. It was Agnes, standing there with 2 steaming travel mugs. Morning, trap setter, she greeted, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and glee. Morning, canary, Ethan replied, taking the coffee. What's the word? Word is she's boiling. Chen has control of the fines now, but her revenge is already starting. Agnes lowered her voice, though they were inside. I got a warning notice this morning. Unauthorized planting of non-native Japanese holly shrubs on the south boundary. I planted those bushes 10 years ago. They're fine, but the fine is $100 a day. She can't use the HOA email, so she's using her personal network. I'm guessing my complaint came from her friend Cynthia on the landscape committee. This was the expected counterattack. Targeted, localized, social harassment. Penelope hadn't lost her contacts, only her official title. She's testing the waters, seeing if her shadow can enforce what her signature can't, Ethan noted, sipping the coffee. She expects me to jump in and defend you, stretching my focus and resources. Don't fight it yet. Appeal through Chen, the new enforcer. She's trying to drag us into the mud. And you? Agnes asked, truly concerned. You're going to that hearing today. You're going to be facing Kellington. He's a pit bull, even if he hates her. The hearing is just containment. My lawyer's prepared. The video is the fact. Everything else is just narrative, Ethan said, moving towards his computer. The real vulnerability isn't her temper, Agnes. It's the mechanism that funds the temper. The fines, the approvals, the contracts. That's where the power and the money lies. For the rest of the morning, while the community held its breath and Penelope was fighting for her reputation in court, Ethan was fighting a different battle entirely. He wasn't focused on property lines. He was focused on data integrity. He logged into the public-facing sections of the HOA portal, cross-referencing published budget reports with publicly filed county contracts. It was tedious, complex work, a puzzle built from PDF documents and poorly digitized receipts. He focused his attention on the one project Penelope had pushed through with zero opposition: the $50,000 replacement of the entire community's main irrigation pump system. Approved 3 months ago. He found the primary invoice. Total cost, $51,200, paid to a company named Aquaflow Solutions. Standard. He then ran a search on Aquaflow Solutions, cross-referencing the company's registered agent with local business filings. The agent was listed as a shell corporation registered in the next state over, a common tax maneuver not immediately suspicious, but Ethan was a security analyst. He didn't look at what was obvious. He looked at the things that were hidden or slightly off. He noticed the address for Aquaflow Solutions on the invoice, Suite 402. He pulled up the public property records for that address. The building was a generic suburban office park. Nothing conclusive. He widened his search. Penelope Albright, plus known associates, plus financial transactions. He found a minor 3-year-old zoning dispute where Penelope had testified in favor of a new commercial dev. James Kellington did not sleep. He spent the entire night in his corner office, the 30-second recording of Ethan Vance's voice playing on a loop, a chance to save your client, the Homeowners Association, from its president. Kellington was a corporate defense attorney. He was paid to protect organizations from liability, not to police the morality of their board members. But the evidence Ethan had compiled, even in its raw, unsolicited form, was a ticking time bomb labeled fiduciary malfeasance. If the state attorney general got this information, Kellington's firm would be dragged into a massive class action suit, liable for negligence in oversight. He didn't call Penelope. He didn't even call his wife. He called the managing partner of his firm, bypassing all lower management. By 4 a.m., a small, highly paid team of forensic accountants had been tasked with a single, covert objective: verify the connection between the HOA's $51,200 payment to Aquaflow Solutions and the $28,000 lien filed by Precision. Piping, Kellington arrived at the courthouse for the 8 a.m. Etro hearing, looking like a man who had wrestled with an alligator and lost. Penelope, by contrast, looked terrifyingly composed. She wore a severe black Chanel suit, her face powdered to an expressionless mask of injured dignity. She radiated the dangerous calm of a predator cornered but not defeated. The hearing was a formality. Ethan's lawyer, David Chen, the property specialist, simply presented the video evidence of the trespass, the prior written warnings, and the documented pattern of Penelope's abusive fines. Kellington, following the strategy decided upon at 4:30 a.m., offered only a minimal defense, not conceding guilt, but arguing that the situation was non-exigent now that Penelope's authority was suspended. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with tired eyes, watched the video of Penelope jabbing her finger near Ethan's lock, then delivered her ruling with ice in her voice. The documented pattern of harassment and the flagrant disregard for written boundaries warrants intervention. Ms. Albright, you are hereby permanently enjoined from approaching or interacting with Mr. Vance's property boundary, his person, or his family. The temporary suspension of your HOA authority is hereby made permanent pending a full board review. This is not a suggestion. This is a court order. The injunction was granted. Ethan had won the battle for the gate. As they left the courtroom, Penelope finally spoke to Kellington, her voice low and venomous. "You fought like a whipped dog, James. Why?" "You were holding back." Kellington stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. "I was following the court's instruction, Penelope. We have far bigger problems than an injunction, problems that involve the sheriff's department and the state AG's office if we don't handle this internally." "What are you talking about?" she demanded. "The irrigation contract. Aquaflow Solutions. I've initiated an internal audit. I recommend you say nothing and return home immediately." Penelope stopped dead in the hallway. Her mind, sharp and ruthless, connected the dots instantly. Only two people could have linked her to Aquaflow and her brother-in-law, Marcus Kellington, or Ethan Vance. Kellington had to have been given the lead. And the only person with the motive, the skill set, and the sheer audacity to dig that deep was the recluse with the sepia gait. Her fury wasn't about the $250 fine anymore. It was about her reputation, her authority, and now, potentially, her freedom. Ethan Vance had not just defended his fence. He had dismantled her entire ecosystem. The emergency in-person board of directors meeting that evening felt less like a governing body and more like a public execution. It was held at the home of David Chen, the board member, who sat at the head of a long dining table, his expression grave. Shelley Davis, the property manager, looked terrified. Kellington stood at the end of the table holding a thin binder containing the preliminary forensic report. He spoke carefully, avoiding the name Penelope until necessary. The investigation has confirmed a significant financial irregularity involving the 2024 irrigation pump replacement project. Kellington began, his voice formal. A payment of $51,200 was issued to a third-party vendor, Aquaflow Solutions. Our investigation shows that the subcontractor who actually performed the installation, Precision Piping Inc., filed a lien for $28,000. This leaves a difference of $23,200 unaccounted for or improperly billed. A heavy silence descended. Furthermore, Kellington continued, looking directly at Penelope, who was perched rigidly on the edge of her seat. Aquaflow Solutions has been traced to a commercial property owned by Silverstream Ventures, a holding company associated with Marcus Albright, the estranged brother-in-law of the president of this association. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Shelley Davis gasped. David Chen looked like he was going to vomit. Penelope finally erupted, slamming her hand on the table. This is outrageous. This is slander. I was overseeing contracts, not managing invoices. This is a simple bookkeeping error, a mistake by the property management firm. She glared at Shelley, throwing the manager under the bus without hesitation. Shelley, emboldened by the presence of Kellington and the other board members, shook her head vehemently. No, I flagged the high cost, Penelope. You told me Aquaflow was a specialized proprietary service, and that the difference was a consulting fee that was non-negotiable. You signed off on the payment authorization with a mandatory release. Penelope's composure shattered. She stood up, knocking her chair backward. You are lying! All of you are complicit in this attack. This is retribution from that. That troll who lives on the corner! He's feeding you misinformation to get out of paying his fines. David Chen raised his hand, cutting through her, shrieking. Penelope, we have a court injunction against you for harassment, and now, forensic evidence of significant financial misconduct. The board has lost all confidence in your ability to govern or your ability to distinguish between the HOA's interests and your own family's profit margins. Chen picked up a pre-written document. The board votes 4-0 to immediately and permanently remove Penelope Albright from the role of HOA president, remove her from the Architectural Review Committee, and revoke all voting and administrative access, effective immediately. We are seizing all administrative files and commencing a full, independent audit of the last 3 years of expenditure. Stripped of her role, Penelope stood there, her body shaking not with panic, but with a cold, absolute rage. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She looked at David Chen, then Shelley, then Kellington, etching their faces into her memory. Ethan Vance, she whispered, her voice dangerously quiet. Tell him he won the game of rules. Tell him I'm changing the game. She turned and stalked out of the meeting. Her departure less a retreat and more a violent promise. Ethan and Agnes celebrated the victory quietly in Ethan's living room. The news spread through the community faster than a wildfire. Penelope was out. The board was in crisis. And the word embezzlement was now circulating freely through the cul-de-sac gossip chain. You're a legend, Ethan, Agnes said, raising her glass of iced tea. You didn't just beat her. You took her crown, her scepter, and her entire savings account. She beat herself, Ethan corrected. watching the news report about a local homeowners association scandal flash across the national feed. I just showed the system its own corruption. The moment she trespassed, she gave me the right to fire back with extreme prejudice. So, what's next for the systems engineer? Agnes asked. A life of peace and a federal brown gate? Ethan felt a genuine lightness for the first time in a year. The massive expenditure of energy had paid off. He was about to reply when his phone flashed. Not with a text or a call, but with a system alert, a silent, urgent notification he hadn't seen in years. It was from Sentinel, his dedicated, isolated, proprietary network monitoring server, the one that ran completely separate from the gate security. Sentinel was the nerve center for his entire smart home, his personal cloud, and the archive of his former life, including all the sensitive, proprietary data from his defense contractor days that he was legally bound to protect. The alert was concise, shocking, and impossible. Intrusion. Root access attempt detected. Geolocation. SW Estates. 0.5 MI source. Dedicated SAT-link spoof. Status. Brute force decryption in progress. Penelope hadn't just promised to change the game. She had hired a specialist. She hadn't bothered with his boundaries or his fences. She had gone straight for his absolute vulnerability, his privacy, his security, and his past. She didn't want him fined. She wanted him destroyed, professionally and legally. Ethan's calm vanished, replaced by a searing spike of pure, desperate fear. He grabbed his laptop, his fingers flying over the keys to isolate the attack vector. "Agnes, you need to go," he said, his voice clipped. His eyes glued to the screen as a furious cascade of red warnings flashed. "Now, I have a critical situation. What is it?" "What happened?" "She didn't hire a lawyer this time," Ethan muttered, watching the progress bar on the intrusion attempt tick relentlessly upward. "She hired a hacker, and she's going after everything." The intruder was specifically targeting the archival folder labeled Project Chimera. This wasn't a random attack. This was targeted revenge, aimed at exploiting the deepest, most dangerous secret of his previous life. If that data was breached, the HOA scandal would be forgotten. And Ethan. The light in Ethan's kitchen, usually soft, ambient white, turned a blinding, critical red. The sound was a harsh, unrelenting siren, not audible, but emanating from the internal speakers of the Sentinel server, a sound only a retired systems engineer could truly hear. Decryption threshold. 90% glared on the screen, frozen there like a digital heart attack. Agnes, out. "Now!" Ethan yelled, his voice rough. He didn't look at her. His focus was absolute, zeroed in on the hostile code attempting to tunnel into his darkest secret. Agnes, stunned by the transformation from calm neighbor to cold security operative, scrambled backward, knocking over her glass of iced tea. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed her keys and fled, the front door clicking shut behind her just as Ethan dropped to the floor, yanking out the primary fiber connection leading from the garage to the rest of the house. He was running a two-front war. Containment and tracing. Containment. The dedicated SAT-link spoof attack was a brutal, custom-built quantum entanglement decoder, military-grade stuff. Penelope hadn't hired a script kiddie. She'd hired a professional mercenary. Ethan's initial automated defense, the Scorched Earth Protocol, was a layered deletion sequence, designed to wipe the Project Chimera archive across 3 geographically separated, encrypted drives simultaneously. But the decryption was too fast. The progress bar jumped to 92%. Ethan accessed the Sentinel server directly, bypassing the GUI for the console. He typed rapid, specialized commands, the syntax flowing from muscle memory honed over 2 decades of defending national secrets. Initiate kill chain. Chimera archive D2 override deletion priority force. Target vector isolation. Primary defense arrays, C. Deletion sequence was now active, but it was designed to be slow and thorough, masking the true nature of the data. It would take 4 minutes to guarantee complete unrecoverable destruction. Decryption. Threshold, 95%. Ethan calculated the delta. He had 45 seconds before the intruder gained root access to the Chimera directory. If they got access for even 5 seconds, they could siphon off the first few megabytes, enough to identify the project and, more importantly, him. Before the delete finished, he had to sacrifice speed for security. He couldn't risk a standard delete. He had to physically burn the data. His heart hammered against his ribs. Project Chimera wasn't just classified. Its disclosure would implicate dozens of high-ranking officials and expose the structural vulnerabilities of entire national defense grids, data that, in the wrong hands, could destroy his life and destabilize global security. He had retired to Sweetwater Estates to bury Chimera, not fight a cyber war over a gate stain. He looked at the progress bar, 98%. With a curse, Ethan executed the final, most dangerous command. He didn't need to wipe the drive. He needed to corrupt the master file table, MFT, and the journaling file system, JFS, the digital blueprints that told the operating system where the files resided. Inject to corrupt. Kernel. Dev SDB Chimera Archive. Loop source cipher 0x dead beef. 1000 initiate mass file system damage forced. The screen flashed success. The progress bar for the decryption threshold dropped instantly from 98% to 0%. The brute force attack hit a wall of digital static. The data was now safe, but not because it was deleted. It was safe because it was now an unrecognizable, unreadable mess. The Chimera archive was lost, likely forever, but it was contained. Ethan collapsed back against the cold granite island, sweat stinging his eyes. He had won the defensive war, but the cost was the total obliteration of the one thing he had sworn to protect. The data was destroyed, but the attacker was still out there. Tracing. He returned to the Sentinel logs, the dedicated SAT-link spoof. That kind of bandwidth and technical obfuscation required two things: expensive, specialized equipment and proximity. He isolated the geolocation stamp captured before the attacker cloaked the connection. Geolocation. SW Estates. 0.5 MI. Quadrant. 4. Lat long. XXXX. YYY. Quadrant 4. That was the northernmost section of the cul-de-sac. He knew that quadrant intimately. It was the location of only 3 houses, including Penelope Albright's. But the precise coordinates didn't lead to her house. They led to the edge of the nature preserve, behind the sprawling, unkempt property of House Number 12. House Number 12 was owned by a retired commercial pilot named Gary Voss. Gary was a quiet, harmless man, known for his eccentric collection of CB radios and his general disinterest in HOA affairs. Ethan's mind raced. Why Gary Voss's house? He cross-referenced the unique digital signature of the brute force attempt against a global database of known high-level threat actors he had compiled during his career. The search took 5 agonizing seconds. Match found. Signature, 77 Alpha Threat Actor. The Needle. Ethan remembered the name from a redacted NSA report 5 years ago. A ghost. A specialized penetration expert who worked exclusively for private military contractors and ruthless private entities. Her specialty was deep-cover corporate and financial espionage. She was known for demanding exorbitant fees and only working for those who could guarantee complete secrecy and a direct line to the target. Penelope hadn't just hired a hacker. She had hired a monster. He needed to confirm the connection. He accessed the public county records again, focusing on Gary Voss, House Number 12. Ethan didn't look at the deed or the mortgage. He looked at the utility bills. Gary Voss's monthly electricity consumption had spiked 400% in the last week, the kind of spike consistent with running multiple high-power industrial-grade servers or a dedicated SAT-link uplink station. Penelope wasn't working from her pristine office. She had paid Gary Voss a fortune, or threatened him, to turn his secluded home into a black site, a private digital fortress 500 meters from her target. The pieces clicked into a chillingly clear picture. Penelope, stripped of her legal authority and motivated by pure vengeance, had outsourced her destruction. She had found a way to maintain the distance required by the court-ordered injunction while executing the worst possible attack. Ethan straightened up. The fear was gone, replaced by the white-hot, focused clarity of a man who has lost everything but the drive for retribution. He was no longer fighting the HOA. He was fighting a certified, high-level threat actor on his own street. He grabbed his utility bag from the garage, not the kind used for tools, but the specialized case containing his professional diagnostics equipment. Inside was a small, military-grade frequency jammer, legally questionable but necessary, and a dedicated network probe. He had to shut down the connection immediately. If the needle realized her data packet had been corrupted, not just denied, she would initiate a secondary protocol, likely aimed at physically destroying the network infrastructure, or worse, distributing the partial, identifying data packet she did manage to siphon. Ethan slipped out the back door and moved toward the nature preserve that bordered his lot and Gary Voss's. The sun was setting, casting long purple shadows over the impeccable lawns, a perfect cover for a covert operation. He moved silently through the dense, overgrown brush of the preserve, ignoring the low-hanging branches and the sound of rustling animals. His target was the rear of House 12, where the massive, power-hungry satellite dish was surely located. When he reached the boundary fence of Gary Voss's property, he saw it, a newly erected, thick canvas tarp shielding a structure in the backyard. Under the tarp, the low, powerful hum of industrial air conditioning fought to keep server equipment cool. Ethan dropped into a crouch. He pulled out the frequency jammer. It was the size of a water bottle, but capable of generating enough targeted electromagnetic noise to blind a small country's communications for a few critical minutes. He activated the stealth function of the jammer, setting it to target the specific high-frequency band used by sat-link providers. He initiated the 3-minute countdown. The jammer would cripple her uplink, giving him a small, precise window. Just as the faint green light on the jammer began to blink, the back door of House 12 opened. A woman stepped out. Not Gary Voss. The woman was slender, dressed in tactical black cargo pants and a tightly fitted gray hoodie, her face sharp and emotionless. Her eyes immediately scanned the shadows. It was the needle. She was holding a small silver device, a signal analyzer. She had detected the faint trace of Ethan's failed corruption protocol and was now checking for physical countermeasures. The needle moved quickly, efficiently, heading straight toward the covered tarp. She stopped just shy of the perimeter, her eyes settling on the boundary fence less than 30 feet from Ethan's position. She hadn't seen him, but she knew he was there. "Ethan Vance," she called out, her voice amplified and distorted by a small speaker hidden on her person, a digital, chilling echo. "The data is corrupted. A very clever defense. The Chimera archive is safe for now, but I have enough metadata to know who you are. And now I know where you live." She raised the silver device, pointing it directly at the boundary fence separating the properties. "Penelope Albright pays well for success. She pays better for destruction. I'll see you tomorrow." She didn't wait for a response. She tossed the silver device over the fence. It landed with a soft thud directly at Ethan's feet. It wasn't a weapon. It was a standard network node, and it was broadcasting a single, clear message in a continuous loop. "I'm coming for your gate." The threat wasn't digital anymore. It was personal, physical, and tied to the very first point of conflict. Ethan H. Ethan Vance did not sleep. The network node, the needle had thrown over the fence, lay on his kitchen island, broadcasting its silent, relentless taunt. "I'm coming for your gate." The threat was clear, simple, and terrifyingly direct. It wasn't about data anymore. It was about humiliation, vengeance, and the destruction of the one symbol Ethan had fought for. The physical gate. He spent the hours before dawn not reinforcing the house, but preparing the gate. The cypress structure, the subject of months of petty tyranny, was more than just a barrier. It was the final layer of his defense. He had meticulously designed it to be sturdy, but also to serve as an anchor point for his integrated, multimodal security system. Ethan didn't install tripwires or booby traps. He installed proof. He started by reactivating the Scorched Earth protocol, not for the Chimera archives but for his neighborhood CAM network. He partitioned the drive, creating a secure, hidden loop dedicated exclusively to the gate's immediate vicinity, feeding into a military-spec recorder that could operate independently of grid power or Wi-Fi. It was recording everything, constantly, with triple redundancies. He had learned his lesson. Never trust the public-facing logs. Next, he focused on the network node she had tossed. It was a standard commercial-grade router, but the Needle had flashed it with a proprietary OS, likely a payload intended to hijack his local network as soon as she breached the gate, granting her remote access to the few digital devices he hadn't isolated. Ethan carefully cracked open the casing and installed a reverse trace script, a tiny, elegant piece of code that would do two things upon connection: log the node's permanent MAC address, and initiate an immediate high-power feedback loop, frying the node's internal chipset. He then tucked the device back under the lip of the gate, exactly where she had left it. Finally, he called his lawyer, David Chen, not the property specialist, but the corporate fraud specialist he was now working with. The board's action gave Kellington the cover he needed, Ethan said, his voice low and steady as the first light touched his neighborhood. He's running the audit. Tell him the AG needs the full, unredacted corporate records for Aquaflow Solutions, the ones proving Marcus Albright's connection, by noon today. If they fail to provide it, the documents I sent to you are being forwarded directly to the FBI's Regional Cybercrime Task Force. You don't need to involve the FBI yet, Chen argued, concerned. The local police can handle a simple trespass. This isn't simple trespass, David. The woman coming here is a documented threat actor, and she's coming to destroy evidence. This needs federal attention. Tell Kellington that the consequence for failing to move on the fraud charges is that he will be investigated for obstruction of justice regarding a cyber espionage attempt. He has no choice. Noon, full transfer. With the digital and legal traps set, Ethan went to his garage. He wasn't a fighter, but he was a highly trained operative. He knew how to defend a perimeter. He dressed in simple dark clothing and settled into the surveillance room he had built behind the heavy steel door in the back of the garage, the safe room. Penelope Albright was a ruined woman. The bank had frozen her personal assets pending the forensic audit. Her husband, the wealthy commodities broker, had moved out and filed for divorce by lunchtime, and the neighborhood WhatsApp chat was a vicious torrent of condemnation. She was alone in her pristine mansion, dressed in silk pajamas, holding a glass of scotch, watching the sun rise. When she heard the soft rap on her back door, she felt a flicker of hope. She opened it to find the Needle standing there, still in her tactical clothing, a large tool bag slung over her shoulder. "Report," Penelope demanded, her voice hoarse. "The target is protected," the Needle stated flatly. "I breached the perimeter, but the archive was corrupted, a deliberate, complex file system attack. It was the work of a professional, possibly high-level government. I only recovered metadata, but it confirms his identity. Ethan Vance is a ghost. He burned everything." Penelope smashed her glass against the wall. "He destroyed me. He took my fines, my authority, my marriage. I paid you $300,000 to eliminate him, not to come back empty-handed. My contract was for digital retrieval, which failed," the Needle said, unfazed. "But I offered a secondary service, personal message delivery." She gestured toward the cul-de-sac. "I will be back in 2 hours to physically remove the gate you complained about. It will be violent, messy, and loud. It will violate the court order, but technically I am not you. I am simply a contractor performing unauthorized landscaping work. You will be sitting here, completely clean." Penelope smiled, a slow, terrifying curve of her lips. It was crude, but it was cathartic. "Do it. Make him watch. Bring the whole thing down." At 10:45 a.m., Ethan watched the feed from his garage monitor. He saw a battered black utility truck idling 2 blocks away. The Needle stepped out, wearing a high-visibility yellow vest over her tactical gear, a deliberate attempt at blending in as a utility worker. She was carrying a battery-powered reciprocating saw and a heavy pry bar. She approached the sepia gate, her movements economical and focused. She crouched down, picked up the network node she had thrown the night before, and gave a brief, predatory smirk toward the garage window. Knowing Ethan was watching, she slipped the node into a port near the gate's hinge, the old external power feed for the security lights, intending to execute the digital takeover while simultaneously commencing the physical destruction. The instant the contacts touched, the node lit up with a blinding flash, followed by a sharp crack. A small plume of acrid smoke rose from the device as the internal circuitry, targeted by Ethan's reverse trace script, was violently overloaded. The needle recoiled, cursing under her breath. Interference! She abandoned the digital approach and raised the reciprocating saw, the blade whining to life, a shrill, ear-splitting sound that pierced the morning quiet of Sweetwater Estates. She slammed the blade against the wood of the gate, but the industrial-grade marine-sealed cypress barely splintered. She tried again and again, fury replacing her professional cool. The destruction was proving difficult. Ethan didn't move. He had the video feed. He had the physical evidence. He was waiting for the final element. Suddenly, a loud, sustained, non-audible pulse of electromagnetic noise ripped through the air. It was the effect of Ethan's frequency jammer, now operating at full power, targeting the specific satellite bands used by the needle's private communication and emergency contact channels. She stopped sawing. She looked up, her face etched with sudden alarm. She wasn't just being defended against. She was being isolated. Ethan hit the final button on his control panel, activating a small, hidden microphone and speaker system embedded discreetly in the gate's internal framing. Ethan's voice, calm, amplified, and devoid of emotion, boomed out across the silent cul-de-sac. The gate is treated with a Class C fire retardant composite, designed for long-term acoustic baffling. Your standard commercial saw will overheat in 60 seconds. You are currently cut off from all outside communication. Your MAC address and threat signature are being digitally transferred to the State Attorney General's Cybercrime Division. The needle dropped the saw. She pulled out a secure satellite phone, tried to activate it, and saw the dreaded no signal message. She looked wildly around the empty street. She was trapped on a highly monitored property, physically attacking a structure, while her professional profile was being exposed to federal authorities. It wasn't just a physical trap. It was a systemic trap. The game is over, Ethan's voice concluded. You trespassed on my property, initiating a chain of events that has led to a verified, ongoing felony investigation into corporate fraud, money laundering, and now, attempted cyber terrorism. You are not just a contractor. You are evidence. Just then, two unmarked black SUVs rounded the corner of the cul-de-sac, moving with slow, deliberate precision. They weren't patrol cars. They were government vehicles. 4 men in dark suits wearing earpieces exited the vehicles, moving toward the gate. The needle didn't look at the gate or the men. She looked straight at Ethan's garage window, her eyes blazing with respect and pure hatred. She was beaten, not by brute force, but by superior systems architecture. She threw her pry bar into the landscaping and raised her hands in a sign of surrender. The final act of justice was swift and devastating. The forensic audit, initiated by Kellington under intense pressure from Chen, confirmed the $23,200 fraud. By 3 p.m., the evidence, now fortified by the needle's testimony against her employer in exchange for a plea deal, was overwhelming. The FBI arrested Penelope Albright at her home for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit larceny, and tampering with evidence related to the attempted cyber attack on Ethan Vance's property. The final image, captured by Agnes from her porch across the street, was of Penelope, stripped of her composure, being led away in handcuffs. She looked directly at Ethan's house, not with the old petty fury of the HOA president, but with the hollow despair of a woman who had understood, too late, that she was facing the consequences of her final, reckless choice. Days later, the official community newsletter arrived. David Chen, the new acting president, announced the results of the special election. Ethan Vance did not run, but he did accept an appointment to the newly formed, fully independent Financial Review A.